Mega Man X, Capcom's definitive side-scrolling action platformer, today regarded as one of the best games in the Super Nintendo's extensive library. But how did we get from this to this? To find out how Mega Man X reinvented its series, we've got to start in Osaka, Japan. The date, December 1987. Originally established as a developer of arcade games, Capcom had recently found success in porting some of its arcade titles, such as 1942 and Commando, to Nintendo's new home console, the NES or Famicom in Japan. Capcom would task a small team to develop a new franchise that would be built from the ground up exclusively as a home console experience. Whereas critics praised Mega Man for its overall design, the game was not the immediate commercial hit that Capcom was looking for, though it did establish the iconic gameplay, mechanics, and conventions that would go on to define the series' many future entries. The following year, Capcom released the acclaimed Mega Man 2, which would go on to sell over 1.5 million copies, completely smashing all commercial expectations. Off the back of this success, Mega Man would see a total of 6 main series entries on the NES and cement itself firmly as one of Capcom's flagship IPs. Despite having so many sequels, the overall formula had changed little since the original. The game's mechanical depth was delivered primarily through the complex level design and the wide variety of different special weapons to acquire that each have their own unique strengths and weaknesses. 2 big steps forward came in the form of a slide mechanic in Mega Man 3 and the Mega Buster in Mega Man 4. But a new console meant the opportunity to reinvent Mega Man in a major way, and that is exactly what they did. Retro Radar, this is Mega Man X. All Mega Man X gameplay footage played and recorded on my original Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It's the 22nd century, approximately 100 years after the original Mega Man. War is waged on humanity by sentient robots that have betrayed Asimov's eponymous first law, that a robot shall not harm a human. As the situation becomes desperate, an archaeologist discovers the ruins of a robotics facility once operated by the legendary Dr. Light, the original inventor of robots who could think, feel, and learn like humans. Within is a capsule containing Dr. Light's final and ultimate creation, the android known as X. As possibly the last hope for humanity against the robots, X is awakened and becomes a maverick hunter. Dr. Light had given X free will, and with it the ability to choose his own path in life, and hoped dearly that the world would allow him to choose one of peace. But he had also foreseen a future where humanity would need a champion. Should his creation be destined to fight, several more capsules had been hidden across the land, each containing powerful combat gear that would equip X with weapons and armor to overcome any adversary. Confusingly, all the previous games used Roman numerals for their titles, and X is the numeral that represents the number 10, so you'd be forgiven for wondering what happened to Mega Man 7, 8, and 9. This is X in his most basic form. You'll notice that he doesn't look quite like the cover art of the game. You might even question whether that guy and this guy are the same character. Right now, you're lacking all of your combat equipment and looking far more reminiscent of the familiar Blue Bomber from the NES, albeit with stunning new detail. By temporarily depriving you of your upgrades, it even plays the same as the last 6 Mega Man games, feeling instantly at home to anyone who was already intimate with the series. But unlike the previous games, instead of loading directly into Stage Select, it delivers one of the best designed tutorials of any game this generation. We find ourselves on a highway that's under attack by a robot maverick. The first enemy we come face to face with is this wheel robot. It's short and travels towards you along the ground, so your first instinct might be to jump over it. This is one small thing, but it's the beginning of how the tutorial stage teaches you to play the game. The next enemy is tall and stationary. too high to jump over, so you try out your X-Buster. You learn that enemies flash white when your shots are damaging them. This is important visual feedback as it lets you know that what you're doing is working. Now we've practiced jumping and shooting, up ahead is a small ledge over which you'll confront flying enemies that are too high to be shot from the ground. Instinctively, you put what you've learned so far together and understand that you need to jump and shoot at the same time. All of this may seem obvious, but I promise you that none of it is by accident. When the flying robots are destroyed, they break part of the platform below them, allowing you to safely notice from a distance that the environment can be destructible, so you won't be taken by surprise later on. Soon we reach our first mini-boss. This is a more powerful foe that will require far more shots to destroy. The unassuming Bumblebee doesn't pose much of a threat as it slowly hovers towards you, but its hidden purpose is actually to teach you a totally new game mechanic. When defeated, it will collapse this whole section of roadway, leaving you stranded at the bottom of a pit, seemingly with no way out. Since you've been moving to the right to progress throughout the stage thus far, naturally you try moving to the right wall. When you come up against it, instead of falling, you notice that X slides gradually to the bottom. This is new. You jump and try it again. Interesting. What happens if you press jump while sliding? That's what happens. Wall jumping. When something has been designed so very right, you may not notice it being done at all. You also have items placed in view on the opposite side of the wall, so once you've scaled the pit and escaped, the game incentivizes and rewards you for practicing this mechanic further. Until now, the gameplay has been very similar to the original Mega Man. This is the first major addition that has the potential to totally reinvent how the game approaches verticality. And without any written instructions, Mega Man X has relied on human intuition alone to subtly instill you with an understanding of its core mechanics. Next, we encounter some tall enemies. Shooting at them, you'll notice that your bullets appear to pass between their legs, and they aren't flashing white, which we understand to mean that your attacks are not working. They have this big bulbous head as an obvious target, so you try shooting that, and it works. This teaches us that some enemies have weak spots that you have to take advantage of to defeat them. Further ahead are these broken and partially collapsed bits of roadway. Earlier you'll remember that the game taught us that the environment can be destructible, so when we step on the edge and it begins to fall away, we're prepared for this and we safely jump across to the other side. If you jump over this middle bit of road without touching it, it will still fall away as it's not being structurally supported, instead of just floating in mid-air. Another nice bit of attention to detail. When you collide with an enemy or get hit by their attacks, you take damage. There's a slight knockback and afterwards you become invulnerable to damage for a brief moment, so you always have time to react to a threat. You'll notice your health bar in the top left corner has decreased, but only by a small amount, so you've got quite a lot of life and you can afford to make mistakes. Enemies can drop health items when they die, and most common enemies will respawn by simply moving away and returning to the same screen. This allows you to effectively farm for item drops if you need to. The other item is ammunition for your special weapons, but we don't have any yet. It may have been better for this not to drop until you'd acquired your first special weapon to avoid confusion about what it does, but this is a very minor complaint. Finally, we conclude the tutorial level with an encounter against one of the game's antagonists, Vile. Vile is a lieutenant of Sigma who has replaced Dr. Wily as the main villain of the game. This is an unwinnable encounter. You're supposed to lose to Vile here, but it serves two purposes. First, to advance the narrative and also to introduce a new character, Zero. Zero somewhat resembles X, besides the color swap, though his weapons and equipment appear far more advanced than our own. See how effortlessly he's able to defeat Vile and rescue us? X laments that he wasn't strong enough, only to be reassured by Zero. You haven't reached your full potential. You may be weak now, but you can become stronger. Maybe even as strong as I am. This alludes to another new mechanic, persistent character progression in the form of upgrades to find and collect. Immediately, the frustration of losing your battle against Vile is taken away and turned into excitement and anticipation at the promise of becoming much stronger. We won't touch on what the upgrades actually do here. We'll keep hold of it to discuss each of them in detail later. It also provides us with a clear objective and direction going forward. Become more powerful, reach Sigma's fortress, and destroy Vile. This transitions us confidently out of the tutorial and into the conventional stage select screen that makes a return from all previous Mega Man games. The introductory stage is such an immense improvement compared to being thrust abruptly into stage select, not only because it teaches us how to play the game, but also because it creates the context for what we're doing, who the main characters are, and why we have to fight the robot Mavericks and stop Sigma. We see a portrait of each of the 8 Mavericks, but also have access to a map of the setting where the game takes place, giving a close-up view of the environmental theme. The stages themselves are more grounded and realistic, each of them taking clear inspiration from a particular real-world environment. This is supposed to better reflect that Mega Man X is taking place on Earth, in our world but in the future, which contributes towards crafting that clear and relatable context for the game. It's easier to empathize with the characters when you understand that they have lives and homes to protect. Now, you can tackle the next 8 stages in any order, just like in the earlier games. However, not all stages are created equal. Otherwise, you'd have a sort of backwards difficulty curve where the game starts off hard and gets easier as you become more powerful. So whereas you can complete the stages whichever way you'd like if you're good enough, there does exist a sort of unofficial intended order to them as well. The problem is the game doesn't tell you that order. The stage that is selected by default is definitely one of the most difficult of the 8. Not where you want to go first, especially as a new player. Mega Man has a reputation for being a very hard game, and it certainly can be, but the challenge can also be heavily mitigated by approaching the stages in the right order. So I'm going to illustrate the best path that I recommend new players to take when playing for the first time. Start with Chill Penguin, then Storm Eagle, Flame Mammoth, Spark Mandrill, Armored Armadillo, Boomer Coanga, Sting Chameleon, and finally Launch Octopus. Then return to earlier stages here and here to collect upgrades that we weren't able to obtain on our first visit. The reason I've chosen this order is to efficiently increase our power as much as possible as early as possible. But for now, let's talk more about challenge. While some stages and bosses require a moderate application of player skill to overcome, the main reason why people consider Mega Man X to be a hard game is because they aren't properly exploiting mechanics to their advantage. Boss fights in particular in Mega Man X are designed around the concept of rock, paper, scissors. That is to say, each boss has a weakness, something that specifically counters them. If the boss is a rock, you could bludgeon your way through it with a scissors, or you could just use the paper. By exploiting their weakness, the boss as a whole is made far easier. Just as in the earlier games, every defeated boss will bestow you with a new special weapon, and this weapon will be the weakness of another boss. You get the idea. The problem arises when the game doesn't give you any real indication of what a boss's weakness might be. They aren't obvious either. The only one that really makes sense is Chill Penguin being weak to the fire wave. This introduces a considerable element of trial and error. Your only way of finding out a boss's weakness is to shoot them with each special weapon, one at a time. That or look up a guide. This is something I don't appreciate, and I would at least like to see some thought put into in-game ways to hint at what a boss's weakness is, or just have them make sense. Why would Armored Armadillo, the Earth-themed boss, be weak to the Electric Spark? If anything, it should be the other way around. Or Spark Mandrill weak to Shotgun Ice. It defies rationale. Throughout your trial and error boss exhibitions, you will no doubt end up dying. When you die, you lose a life and are returned to the previous checkpoint in your current stage. Fortunately, there is a checkpoint directly before every boss room, so no tedious slog back just to try again. Extra lives are earned by destroying enemies, and the game is quite generous with them. You have your health fully restored, but not your other resources, though you do have the option to farm for item drops. As I mentioned earlier, enemies respawn when off-screen, so if you've used up all your best special weapon ammo, it's only slightly inconvenient to stock up again. Because of this, the game is rather forgiving. If you lose most of your health scraping through a tough section, you can farm easier enemies until you're back to full strength. The only time this isn't true is with spikes and falling off the bottom of the screen, both of which result in instant death. Fortunately, spikes are used in only a few areas throughout the game, and because of the wall jumping mechanic, you're often able to rescue yourself out of a pit before you die. If you lose all of your lives, you're given a password and returned to the stage select screen. There's unlimited continues, so you'll never lose all your progress, but unfortunately the game lacks an internal battery, so there's no save system. Every time you stop for a break, you'll have to re-enter your password to continue where you left off. Interestingly, if you manage to collect an upgrade from a stage and then lose all of your lives, you actually keep the upgrade. Exploiting this can allow you to permanently obtain upgrades from stages with difficult bosses much earlier in the game. Not something that I think is strictly necessary, as none of the Mavericks are that hard, but worth keeping in mind. Towards the end is where the challenge hits a steep incline. There are a number of other bosses that you face after you've defeated the 8 Mavericks and reached Sigma's fortress. The last boss in particular is extremely difficult, unless you know the specific strategy to defeat him. At that point, choosing the proverbial paper against the rock is less of an option and more of a requirement. More on that when we get there. Overall, I'd say while the game can be hard, it doesn't require a great deal of mechanical skill to complete. Overcoming the challenge is more about employing the right strategies and exploiting weaknesses to your advantage. This makes all the difference. To put this into practice, we're going to need upgrades, and a lot of them. The reason we start with Chill Penguin first is yes, because he's the easiest boss with the easiest stage, but also because this is where we find our first Dr. Light capsule that we want to obtain as early as possible. With it comes another new mechanic in Mega Man X, the dash. Until now, X's default movement speed has been relatively slow. Mega Man 3 introduced the slide, which overall increased the pace of the game, but since you were only able to use it along the ground, it had limited applications due to the level design, platforming, and enemies getting in your way. All of this is addressed by the dash, because when you jump, you preserve your momentum in the air, increasing your speed and allowing you to cover much larger distances than before. You can even dash off of walls and fire your X-Buster while dashing. I can't overstate how much of a game changer this is. The entire feel of the game is altered, and it makes movement itself, traversing the stage, much more enjoyable. The main gameplay loop is fundamentally the same. You move to the right, shoot enemies, and platform your way to the boss, but now you can do it all quicker. The extra range the dash provides to your jump enables you to skip most enemies if you so desire, and the first shot you fire mid-dash deals increased damage, encouraging the use of this mechanic in combat. The new pace of the game is also supported by the fact that you can now cycle your special weapons without pausing. I have this mapped to the X and A buttons on the controller. No longer does swapping weapons interrupt the flow of the action, and the tactile sensation you get when dashing and jumping through stages, swapping weapons on the fly and blasting enemies as you go is just better. You'll also notice that the appearance of X has changed. His legs have these white and gold plates on them now. Whenever you find and collect one of the upgrade capsules left behind by Dr. Light, your character sprite will update to reflect your new power. They might even look slightly familiar to you, like you've seen them somewhere before? Maybe the cover art of the game? That is when it clicks. X is going to look like that, going from this to this. Progression is a strongly motivating mechanic in game design. If you think about it, from the earliest days of arcade games, which often lacked a comprehensive narrative, progress of a kind is a large part of what players found compelling about gaming. They weren't playing Pac-Man or Donkey Kong to experience the story, they were playing to get better and achieve a higher level and a higher score. Then it was player progress, you as the player getting better at the game. Your skill would progress, and that provides gratification. When designers recognized this, they also understood that they could build progression into the game directly, not only in the form of completing stages, but in this case, with a character that is persistently upgraded as you advance through the game. Every time you find an upgrade, it never ceases to provide that unmistakable sense of satisfaction. Because you can still approach the 8 Mavericks in any order, the other 7 stages are designed to be beaten with or without the dash, but it's such a critical item in your toolkit that you'll want to unlock it as soon as possible. The next capsule we'll encounter in the prescribed level order earlier in the video is the Helmet from Storm Eagle's stage, and I have to say this is unfortunately the least exciting of the lot. It's just not very impactful, with only a few niche uses. 1, it allows you to break certain blocks using your head, and 2, it protects you from falling debris later in another stage, but mainly it's a prerequisite to access our next upgrade. In Flame Mammoth's stage, make this extremely precise jump and break these blocks to discover the capsule containing the upgraded Mega Buster. This unlocks the third stage of your charged Mega Buster attack. This time it's pink, and deals the same damage as the blue shot, but now it's even larger. It also creates a small shockwave behind you which does deal damage, allowing you to destroy enemies from both sides. That's not all though. The upgrade unlocks a charged version of every special weapon in the game. Each time we've defeated a boss up to this point, we've earned ourselves a special weapon associated with that robot Maverick. Chill Penguin gave us the Shotgun Ice, and Storm Eagle gave us the Storm Tornado. Remember that the X-Buster can only fire horizontally, while the various special weapons provide additional utility to cover areas where your default weapon can't reach, or otherwise fit a particular use case where they are extremely effective under the right circumstances. We'll cover more of the special weapons in a moment. For now, I want to talk about the fourth and final capsule, found in Sting Chameleon's stage. This contains the body armor. It has a simple purpose. It actually cuts all incoming damage in half, effectively doubling the number of hits you can take. As you can imagine, this can make an enormous difference to the difficulty of the game. Though I normally recommend taking on Sting Chameleon as one of the last Mavericks in your playthrough, you can come here earlier if you are struggling and progress just far enough to collect the upgrade. With that, we finally achieved box art status. This is where you start to look and feel as powerful as Zero mentioned back in the tutorial. Returning to earlier areas that previously gave you trouble, you find you're now able to breeze through them effortlessly. And you will have to backtrack to certain stages, since it's not possible to collect every upgrade your first time through. The upgrades we're backtracking for specifically are heart tanks and sub-tanks. These also persist throughout the entire game once acquired. There are 8 heart tanks to collect, one in each stage, and they each increase your health bar by 2. You start with 16 health, so by obtaining all 8, that can be doubled to 32. Sub-tanks are an interesting mechanic. They store any health items you pick up when you already have full health. You can then enter the menu at any time to drain a sub-tank and add that stored healing to your health bar. There are 4 sub-tanks to collect, and each of them can hold just under a full bar's worth of healing. Finally, let's look at the special weapons. There's 8 in total, and they each follow the theme of the boss they come from, much like all Mega Man games up to this point. The difference is that now these weapons can be charged for an additional effect, thanks to the upgraded Mega Buster. Some have a focus on utility, such as the Shotgun Ice, which fires a blast that shatters upon impact. It reflects off walls and is effective at taking out groups of enemies. The charged attack creates a snowboard which X can ride on top of. It will glide forward at high speed and destroy any minor enemies it impacts along the way. Or take the Rolling Shield, one of the least useful weapons in its basic form. It fires an orb that travels along the ground and can bounce off of walls, and explodes upon contact with the first enemy it reaches. The charged version, however, is much more useful. It provides a protective barrier that will automatically destroy any enemy with under 3 hit points upon contact. This has some extremely powerful applications which we'll look at later. Chameleon Sting fires 3 spikes in a fan ahead of you, threatening enemies in a wide area, but it's most notable for its charged effect. It makes you temporarily invulnerable to all damage and removes collision detection with enemies. You're even able to walk straight through spikes without dying. Other weapons, such as the Fire Wave, have a focus on inflicting damage. Short-ranged but extremely powerful, able to take out enemies in no time as long as you're willing to get up close and personal. Or the Storm Tornado, which creates a large wind tunnel ahead of you which rapidly damages enemies that stay within it. Charging this weapon makes the wind tunnel vertical. The vast amount of utility provided by each of these weapons outshines anything seen in Mega Man 1 through 6, and has the potential to fundamentally alter the way that we approach a stage or a boss depending on what special weapons we have access to. Now let's talk about the stages themselves. Each one introduces a recognizable theme that immediately makes it feel unique to the last. There is some good use of environmental mechanics in Mega Man X, but what I'm really talking about is how the theme informs the level design. Starting with Chill Penguin, we see that snowdrifts cover X up to his knees, and there are rolling snowballs to navigate as you advance through the stage. It would have been very easy for them to include an annoying slidey ice effect that makes your movement floaty and unresponsive, but does anyone ever really enjoy that in any game that does it? I'm glad to say that the tight and responsive controls are preserved throughout. In Flame Mammoth's stage, we find ourselves in this industrial robot factory. This is where a lot of Sigma's army are presumably being constructed, or at least broken down for spare parts. You'll see moving conveyors, partially finished robots, production lines, and crushers to avoid. I really like this because it gives us evidence of the ongoing war effort and builds that into the stage itself. The factory is taking in broken, damaged robots and doubtless pumping out fresh, new ones straight to the front line. Each stage features some number of new enemies that are unique to that environment, as well as several reoccurring ones that you can find across multiple stages. You encounter these enemies using suits of ride armor, and you also get to pilot your own. This is the same style of armor that Vile was using during the tutorial battle, and when you see it, it serves as an ever so delicate reminder of X's motivation to find and destroy Vile. Onwards and upwards, Storm Eagle's stage is the first to have a significant amount of verticality. Earlier Mega Man games had this sluggish screen scrolling effect whenever the stage moved vertically. This slowed down the gameplay by adding frequent transitions. Take Quickman's stage from Mega Man 2. Every 4 or 5 seconds there's an interruption to the gameplay. Fortunately, Mega Man X can scroll in any direction seamlessly, so clunky screen transitions are a thing of the past. With such an open vertical stage comes the opportunity for some exploration. The game doesn't let you go too far off the beaten track, but it does reward you by having some hidden areas with items and upgrades to find. As a general rule carried over from the tutorial, the end of every Mega Man stage can be reached by heading to the right. This holds true throughout the entire game. Therefore, if you ever have the opportunity to not go right, you should take it and see what there is to find. Despite not having a map, you can't get lost, just head right again to reach the end. Another new addition to Mega Man X, some stages will actually change depending on the order you play them. Flame Mammoth is the best example of this. Normally the stage is full of fire and flowing lava, but because we've defeated Chill Penguin, the fire has gone out and the lava has frozen solid, making it far less dangerous. Take a look what it's like when you haven't beaten Chill Penguin so you can see the difference. It is attention to detail like this that I love, and it adds some serious replayability to the game. In fact, just being able to tackle the stages in any order inherently adds a huge amount of replayability by itself. The experience you have traversing a stage or fighting a boss can vary drastically based on what upgrades and special weapons you have or don't have at that point in time. Our focus is to acquire as many early upgrades as we can. Here we're able to collect a heart tank courtesy of the frozen lava, and also a sub-tank. Bear in mind that this can only be obtained now due to having beaten Chill Penguin, as the dash upgrade is required to make this jump and break these blocks. Or take Spark Mandrel's power plant. Since we've defeated Storm Eagle, shattered bits of airship can be seen crash-landed on the ground. Much like Flame Mammoth before, this is not just for show. Normally these glass pipes have electric sparks surging through them which you must carefully jump over to avoid. But now the electric has gone and been replaced with lights that flicker on and off, as if the generator has been damaged and they're struggling to maintain power. Some stages also feature sub-bosses. Here we encounter our first since the tutorial, the Thunder Slimer. It's not much of a threat, and the Storm Tornado makes quite quick work of it. Under normal circumstances, in addition to throwing out slime and slamming down from the ceiling, it can fire bolts of electricity. With the power plant losing energy, however, it won't be able to charge this attack, making the fight that much easier. Boomer Koanga's tower is where I really want to focus on the amazing utility of the charged rolling shield effect. There are so many sections where the barrier is a game changer. Take this auto-scrolling elevator ride up a shaft completely covered in spikes. Avoiding them isn't difficult at first, but on top of that there is a constant stream of enemies flying in to attack you from above. The barrier destroys them all upon contact, allowing you to focus purely on platforming. From now on, you can apply this to nearly all of the difficult platforming sections in the game. The last unique environmental effect I want to talk about is on Launch Octopus's stage. I consider this to be the most difficult of the 8 Maverick stages. Keep in mind, this is the one the game has selected by default when you first finish the tutorial. I have to mention, the environments look amazing. The bright colours and ocean theme just make me happy to be here, but don't be fooled though, this place is dangerous. Once you're submerged beneath the ocean, your jump height and distance are increased dramatically, especially when dash jumping, so you'll be taking this into account for practically the entire stage. Also, quite fittingly, the Fire Wave special weapon doesn't function here at all. I recommend leaving Launch Octopus until last, however, because his stage contains no less than 4 sub-boss encounters, and in terms of available upgrades only provides a single heart tank and access to the homing missile. Since we're concerned with taking this difficult game and making it as easy as we can, this is where the balance of risk-reward is tipped furthest against us, so it's not worth coming here earlier. Soon, all 8 stages are complete and every upgrade in the game acquired. So far, nothing has been overly challenging. When the final Maverick is defeated, we see a short cutscene of X and Zero, who have both finally made it to Sigma's fortress. This is what we've been waiting for. We can finally track down Vile and take our revenge. The stage select has changed. The bottom right panel is how we select Sigma's fortress. Instead of a map of the environment, we get a close-up of Sigma himself. This is the first time we actually see the main antagonist of the game. From here on out, the stages are all relatively short and straightforward. Unlike the 8 Maverick stages, which can be approached in any order and must therefore be surmountable with X's default toolkit alone, all of Sigma's fortress has been designed with the knowledge that by the time you reach it, you'll definitely have access to certain weapons and upgrades. The main focus from here on will be boss battles. There's a lot of them in rapid succession. Preceding each boss room is a short tunnel. This is the only place we see an old-style screen transition, the likes of which featured on the NES games. I actually like that they kept this in. The tunnel gives you a chance to stop and evaluate your situation before facing the boss. You can choose your weapon, top up your health using a sub-tank, and fully charge your Mega Buster. Also, the slight pause derived from the screen transition actually helps to build anticipation, and doesn't get annoying because it's uniquely saved for use in these boss tunnels. We haven't touched on the bosses so far because I wanted to keep them until the end, taking us all the way up to confronting Sigma himself. Just before we dive into that though, I want to talk a little about the graphics and visual design. The game looks incredible. The environments are beautiful, and it's always clear to see exactly what you're looking at. Background and foreground elements are separated from one another by having objects in the distance appear darkened or desaturated. Any part of the environment that you ever have to pay attention to is totally visible and easily distinguished. The HUD is minimalist, consisting only of your health bar and your special weapon ammunition on the left, and the boss health bar on the right. It really doesn't need any more than that, so I have to commend the designers for keeping it simple and not feeling obliged to overclutter the screen with unnecessary information. Animations are smooth and detailed and are used well to indicate what is about to happen, such as before an enemy uses an attack. The amount of creativity that's been put into designing each of the enemies contributes towards the novel appeal of the game. They look amazing. Throughout the original Mega Man line, there was a consistent theme of the robots all having very pronounced eyes, and I think that this went a long way towards achieving a coherent graphical style between a diverse range of stages. This continues in Mega Man X, but the expression of that art style, while familiar, has evolved to become more edgy and, in a sense, matured along with its audience. The robot enemies still comply with this theme, but now the eyes fit in much more convincingly with their overall design. This more subtle approach successfully ties the game together with its predecessors while simultaneously developing its own uniquely identifiable art style. The tone this sets states loudly that this is not just Mega Man, it's Mega Man X. Just look at the way X stands now compared to before. One is decidedly neutral and non-threatening, the other is ready for a fight. You might have noticed that the game developers decided to forego the use of parallax scrolling, which had been a mainstay of platformers for years at this point. The reason they did this was so that they could choose from and display a wider variety of colors on screen at once. The picture processing unit in the Super Nintendo consisted of only 64 kilobytes of static RAM for storing video data. Because of the limited memory, Nintendo developed 8 different optimized graphical modes, each of which allowed for a different combination of color palettes and rendering layers. Parallax scrolling obviously relies on multiple rendering layers, scrolling at different speeds to create an optical illusion that tricks you into perceiving a sense of three-dimensional depth where really there is none. The oversimplified explanation of why this matters is that for the Super Nintendo, more layers means less colors. It could support as many as 4 layers concurrently, but then your palette would be highly limited. By restricting themselves to only 2 layers, one background and one foreground, they could display up to 256 colors simultaneously, allowing for the bright, vibrant, and colorful art style that really imparts a lot of soul to the game. One downside of the stunning graphics is that Mega Man X is a game prone to slowdown, especially since you're able to continuously spawn more enemies by walking back and forth. You can quite easily generate more sprites on screen than the game can handle. Fortunately, this never happens in any crucially important places, so it's not going to break the game. It's more mildly frustrating. Finally, we can't talk about the artistic direction of the game without mentioning the music. The series had become quickly renowned on the NES for its brilliant rock and roll chiptunes. An interesting bit of trivia is that Mega Man in Japan is known as Rockman, named after the music genre, and I'm very happy to say that Mega Man X continues this legacy of awesome, upbeat, melodic soundtracks. Let's have a listen. As you can tell, the music here is just brilliant, and definitely lives up to the legacy left by the NES games. Finally, let's start wrapping up by taking a look at the boss fights. 15 of them in total, not counting the tutorial boss or any of the sub-bosses. To start with the 8 Mavericks, you can see now on screen an illustration that shows each of their weaknesses. When we properly exploit a boss's weakness against them, it can range from simply inflicting increased damage to utterly trivializing the fight. Take a look at Spark Mandrill. Whenever you hit him with the shotgun ice, he'll get completely frozen solid, which interrupts any of his attacks. Simply wait for him to thaw and shoot him again, rinse and repeat until you win. Armored Armadillo is one of the hardest bosses unless you have the electric spark. Hitting him with electric will cause him to lose his protective shell, which otherwise makes him invulnerable for most of the fight. And Flame Mammoth, the Storm Tornado just takes chunks out of his health bar. You still have to execute the usual boss mechanics on this one, but the fight is made significantly shorter with the right special weapon. Also, here's an interesting tip. If you've obtained the boomerang cutter by this point, you can actually use it to chop off Flame Mammoth's trunk, which outright prevents him from using one of his attacks. The same actually goes for Launch Octopus. You know this guy's tough because he tells you you're going down. The boomerang cutter can chop off his tentacles, preventing him from using homing missiles. I'll say it again, I love little details like this. Special interactions that are kind of like little secrets that most players will never see. Against Storm Eagle, we don't use his weakness, but most of his attacks involve trying to push you off the ship, which is effectively countered by having the dash upgrade. This grants you more than enough speed to overcome the pushing effect. Once all 8 Mavericks are defeated, at last we catch up to Sigma's fortress. Inside we meet up with Zero, who is about to confront Vile. This is such a climactic moment because you can't help but reflect on how far you've come since your last encounter in the tutorial. Zero tells you to stay back and let him handle this, and the two race off. You give chase, and in the corridor leading to the boss room you're able to hear the sounds of battle. You arrive only to see that Zero has been defeated and captured. Vile has had an upgrade of his own. He's got a shiny new color-swapped suit of ride armor, and he's more powerful than before. But you can't give up. Maybe by now you've become as strong as Zero, or perhaps even stronger. And so you do battle. This is what you've been waiting for the entire game, a chance to take your revenge. And it's another unwinnable encounter. No, I'm not joking. You have to lose against Vile a second time here, and the fight goes on a while. He doesn't do very much damage, giving you a chance to waste all of your special weapon ammo trying to figure out something that works before you eventually give up. I really don't like this. It happens mostly for plot reasons and not for any benefit to the player this late in the game. Once we've spent 30 seconds allowing Vile to beat away at our massive health bar, he'll capture us as well. This is where Zero makes a last-ditch gambit to secure victory. He breaks free of Vile's cage, and in an attempted murder-suicide, he self-destructs. Unfortunately, Vile survives, but his ride armor is destroyed. Seemingly inspired by Zero's heroic self-sacrifice, we break free of Vile's trap and regain all of our health. Sadly, the game doesn't return any of the ammunition or sub-tanks used in the first phase. This fight is a lot easier. Try to keep him on the opposite end of the screen and shoot him with Rolling Shield. He does so little damage that you can trade blows and still come out on top. Vile is defeated. You've avenged yourself, and Zero's sacrifice was not in vain. You find your friend broken on the ground just ahead. His power is fading fast, but he survives just long enough to know you triumphed over Vile. You've become more powerful than Zero thought possible. Maybe you even have what it takes to push on and defeat Sigma. With these last words, Zero fades away. Between now and the last boss, you'll actually refight all 8 of the robot Mavericks, interspersed with some new bosses: Boss Spider, Rangda-Bangda, and D-Rex. I won't cover the refights in detail because they're functionally the same as the first time you fought them. This takes us all the way up to the final stretch. Before us is a 3-phase boss rush with no checkpoints in between. Here is where Mega Man X really earns its reputation as a hard game, unless you know what to do. Notice there are these continuously spawning caterpillar enemies that can be instantly destroyed with the Rolling Shield's barrier effect. This is crucial since dying doesn't restore any resource except your health bar, so we can quickly farm here to restore your ammunition and sub-tanks between attempts at Sigma. What an excellent feature this is, and yet so easy to overlook. This is it, we're about to confront the rogue Maverick leading the war on humanity. Everything we've been through so far has culminated in this moment. Sigma, being the smug, arrogant video game villain that he is, proclaims that you are beneath his effort and that he won't rob his pet of the pleasure of destroying you. Phase 1, Sigma's Hound, Velgarder. Weak to the shotgun ice, this boss is highly mobile and will jump around the bottom half of the screen, so I recommend wall jumping between attacks. Phase 2 is Sigma himself. It's imperative to get through the first 2 phases with as much health remaining as possible, so we're going to cheese him. As I mentioned earlier, this final stretch can be difficult in the extreme unless you exploit the right strategies to your advantage. Wall jump into the top left corner and Sigma will get stuck in a loop, consistently repeating the same movement. Each cycle, drop down and hit him with his weakness, the electric spark. Sigma is defeated, but he's still got one trick up his sleeve. The room illuminates to reveal an enormous wolf-like robot in the background. The true final boss, Wolf Sigma. Weak to the Rolling Shield, but only vulnerable in its head, the challenge involves avoiding the boss's attacks while scaling the room to hit his weak spot. Wolf Sigma only has 4 attacks, but it is the combination of these overlapping which makes the fight challenging. The head and both claws all behave independently of each other. The claws each guard a wall, making it perilous to wall jump, while the head targets the center of the room with its flame breath and electric attacks. The strategy here is to get on top of either one of its claws and position yourself right on the very edge of it. A lightning attack would normally prevent you from using the claw as a platform, but the hitbox is ever so slightly narrower than the platform itself, allowing you to ride the claw into range of the exposed weak point and ideally get multiple hits with your Rolling Shield. The opposite claw will then come to knock you down, but what makes this difficult more than anything is a mechanic I haven't spoken about until now, because on my first playthrough I didn't learn about it until this very fight. Double tapping the D-pad causes X to dash. There's no option to turn this off despite having mapped a dedicated dash button, and when trying to position ever so precisely at the edge of the platform to avoid the lightning, you'll find yourself inadvertently dashing off the edge and having to climb up all over again. This is frustrating, and I'm sure it was well intentioned by the designers to give the player more control options, but it backfires to make this fight more annoying than it ever needed to be. Finally, by repeating this strategy, Wolf Sigma is destroyed. Humanity is saved. If you get this far, congratulations. You've just beaten what is commonly regarded as one of the most difficult games on the Super Nintendo. I hope that through this video I've demonstrated that it's maybe not quite as difficult as it's given credit for. Despite its reputation, Mega Man X is an amazingly enjoyable game. We've come a long way, all the way from this to this. Through the introduction of new mechanics such as the dash and wall jump, stunning new visuals, and a design philosophy that elevates the principle of persistent character progression, Capcom were able to successfully reinvent Mega Man in a way that stunned players then and is fondly remembered now amongst the best games of the 16-bit generation. It simultaneously remains quintessentially Mega Man while also becoming something new and exciting. The faster gameplay, wider range of movement, the mechanical flexibility all help to build a next-generation experience from a last-generation franchise, while preserving and celebrating the conventions that fans of the series love. Few can claim to transition quite so smoothly between hardware and not only land on their feet, but hit the ground running. Yes, it does have its flaws, like all games, it's far from perfect. Mega Man X is one amongst a minority of games that I think is really better appreciated with a guide. Make of that what you will, but having to discover boss weaknesses and certain strategies on your own is more than enough to make most players give up through frustration. What it's really guilty of is being inaccessible, and that's where the game has the most room for improvement. It's unfortunate after starting off so strongly with a genius tutorial stage. When you play Mega Man X how it's meant to be played, the game is great. And what do you get for completing it? A cutscene with X overlooking Sigma's fortress as it crumbles into ruin and collapses into the ocean, swallowed by the waves. Then a credit roll. X returns to the highway from the tutorial stage, now his fully upgraded self, and all the damage done by the Mavericks is restored. Peace is achieved thanks to you. There are no post-game features, but due to the inherent replayability derived from being non-linear, I don't feel like it needs anything else to increase its longevity. That, ladies and gentlemen, was Mega Man X. I sincerely hope you enjoyed watching as much as I enjoyed making this video. If you've played Mega Man X, let me know what you think in the comments down below. And if you made it this far, please don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a wonderful day. This has been Retro Radar, signing out.